3 weeks ago, Naomi Bennett was standing alone at a class reunion, counting the minutes until she could leave without anyone noticing. Tonight, she was standing on a private penthouse balcony 42 floors above Seoul, watching the city light up the sky like something out of a dream she hadn't been brave enough to have for herself. The Han River stretched out below her, wide and dark and glittering, and the air was warm and carried the particular electricity of a city that never fully slept. Behind her, through the floor-to-ceiling glass doors, she could hear Junwoo on a call, his voice low and precise, the way it always was when business required his full attention, and the sound of it, the simple, ordinary domesticity of it, made something in her chest feel full in a way she didn't quite have words for yet. She had a glass of red wine. She had a view that belonged in a magazine. She had somehow, inexplicably, a man who had crossed an entire ocean because she hadn't answered his calls. She should have felt only joy, so why was there something else underneath it? Something quiet and careful, like the feeling you get when everything is going too well, and the part of your brain that survived difficult things refuses to fully relax. She didn't know yet, but she would. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, expecting Camille. Her best friend had been sending increasingly unhinged voice notes ever since the reunion video surfaced online, the most recent one consisting entirely of screaming followed by the phrase, "Naomi, I need you to explain this immediately." But it wasn't Camille. It was a Google alert. She had set it up 2 days ago at Junwoo's suggestion, to monitor what was being said about them publicly. At the time, she had thought it was a reasonable, measured idea, a way to stay informed, a way to feel prepared. She was not prepared. The notification count read 4,700. She stared at it, then she opened it. The first headline read, "Korean billionaire's mystery woman who is Naomi Bennett." The second, "Kang Junwoo goes public and his girlfriend is not who anyone expected." The third was less kind. The fourth was worse. She scrolled past entertainment blogs and gossip channels and opinion pieces written by people who had never met her and had decided, based on 17 seconds of ballroom footage, that they understood everything about her life and motivations and character. The comments were. She stopped reading the comments. She lowered her phone slowly and looked back out at the city. This, she thought, is the part of the fairy tale nobody narrates. The part after the ballroom, after the hand extended, after the car pulling into the city night. The part where the world, which did not witness the rain in Seoul or the pharmacy steps or the 40 minutes of conversation that changed everything. The part where the world looks at what you have and decides it has the right to an opinion about whether you deserve it. Naomi had survived being invisible. She was about to discover that being seen came with its own kind of war, but she didn't know that yet. Not fully, not tonight. Tonight she only knew that she had 4,700 notifications, and a view of Seoul and a man who had called her baby in a room full of people who had spent years making her feel like she was less than. She heard the glass door open behind her. The call ran long, Junwoo said, coming to stand beside her. He had loosened his tie and rolled his sleeves to the elbow, which she had privately decided was the most dangerously attractive version of him, though she had not told him this because he was already difficult enough to be around without adding that information to his arsenal. "You should have woken me. You weren't asleep," she said. "You were negotiating a hotel acquisition. Can do both." He looked at the phone in her hand, then at her face with the particular attentiveness she had learned to recognize, the way he looked when he was reading between the lines of what she was saying. "How bad is it? 4,700 alerts." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not unexpected. I know. It bother you." She considered the honest answer, which was more complicated than yes or no. "Some of it does," she said carefully. "The ones that question whether I'm genuine. Whether I'm with you for," she gestured vaguely, which encompassed the penthouse and the city and the general overwhelming enormity of his life. "You gave a sick stranger your very expensive coffee in the rain," he said, "before you knew my name, before you knew anything about me." He looked at her steadily. "I am not concerned about your motivations, Naomi." She looked at him. "Your family might be." Something shifted in his expression. Slight, controlled. But she caught it because she had spent the past 3 weeks learning the specific vocabulary of his silences. This one said, "You're not wrong, and I have already been thinking about this, and I was hoping we had more time before it arrived." "My mother," he said after a moment, "is a businesswoman first. She will need time. Much time, more than she'll admit to needing." He said it with the dry precision of someone who had been navigating a complicated relationship for 35 years and had made a certain peace with its architecture. "But she will come around." Naomi nodded. She wanted to believe him. She did believe him, mostly the part of her that trusted his judgment and his knowledge of his own family. But there was another part, smaller and more stubborn, that had been here before. That knew what it looked like when powerful people decided you didn't belong somewhere. That knew the specific texture of being assessed, and found insufficient by people who had decided the outcome before the meeting began. She had survived it once. She would survive it again. What she didn't know, what neither of them knew, standing on that balcony above Seoul while the city burned gold beneath them, was that survival was about to require everything she had. Because on the other side of the world, in a beautiful house in Atlanta, Vanessa Whitmore was sitting at her kitchen island at 11 o'clock at night with a glass of wine she wasn't tasting and a laptop open to a video she had watched 47 times. The video of the reunion. The video that had 4 million views now and climbing. The video in which Kang Junwoo walked past every woman in the room to stand in front of Naomi Bennett and say, "Baby, there you are," and the camera, held by someone's unsteady hand, had caught briefly but unmistakably the expression on Vanessa's face in the background. She had seen the screenshots. People had made memes of her expression. 3 separate accounts had created compilations of her face at that exact moment paired with audio of glass shattering. 4 million views. 47 times. And every single time, the rage in her chest rebuilt itself into something harder and more purposeful than the time before, Philip had noticed. Her husband had come downstairs twice to find her at that kitchen island, and had twice said her name with the particular careful tone of a man who had been married long enough to recognize an obsession when he was watching one develop in real time. The second time he had sat down across from her and said, quietly, "Vanessa, let it go." She had smiled at him. She had closed the laptop. She had gone upstairs. She had opened it again at 2 in the morning, because Vanessa had decided, with the cold, methodical clarity of a woman who had never been publicly humiliated before and found the experience absolutely intolerable, that Naomi Bennett's fairy tale was not over. It was just about to get complicated, and she wasn't the only one who thought so. Seoul in the morning was a different city entirely, where the night version was all gold light and distant hum and the dreamlike quality of a place seen from above. The daytime Seoul that Naomi was slowly learning was immediate and textured and alive in a way that demanded your full attention. The street markets near Junwoo's favorite breakfast spot, the particular smell of the city in early morning, cool air and coffee and something fried and wonderful from a cart 3 stalls down. The way people moved with purposeful, unhurried efficiency, as though they had all privately agreed on the correct speed for existing in this city and nobody had bothered to inform the rest of the world. She loved it. That was the thing she hadn't expected, not just the luxury, which was real and undeniable, and occasionally so overwhelming it made her laugh out loud, but the city itself, the texture of it. The way it was simultaneously ancient and relentlessly modern, temples and skyscrapers occupying the same skyline without apparent contradiction. She had been here 2 weeks, and she was already thinking about what it would mean to stay longer. Junwoo watched her fall in love with his city with an expression she had learned to identify as his version of happiness. Quiet, warm, contained, like a room where a fire was burning steadily behind a closed door. He took her places he had not taken people before. Not the obvious places, not the curated luxury itinerary he could have assembled in his sleep, but the specific personal geography of a person showing someone else how they actually lived when nobody was performing anything. The small restaurant near his old university, where the owner had known him since he was 22, and still called him by his first name without the honorifics that everyone else layered onto him like armor. The bookshop in Insadong where he bought architecture journals he claimed were for business, and she strongly suspected were for pleasure. The park near the Han River where he ran in the early morning and had, twice now, found her already there before him, which had produced both times an expression of genuine surprise that she collected quietly because it was rare and therefore precious. "You actually ran," he said the second time, slightly breathless, stopping beside her on the path. "You sound shocked." "I'm shocked." "It's 5:45 in the morning. Architects have discipline," she informed him. He looked at her for a moment with that almost smile she had by now fully catalogued. "Yes," he said simply, "they do." It was the kind of exchange that meant nothing and everything simultaneously, the kind of small, private moment that accumulates between 2 people who are learning each other and finding, with increasing frequency, that what they're finding is good, better than expected. Better, maybe, than either of them had fully allowed themselves to anticipate. These were the days Naomi would return to later, when everything became difficult. She would close her eyes and go back to the park at 5:45 in the morning and the bookshop in Insadong and the restaurant owner, who called him Junwoo, and the way the city looked from 42 floors up at night. And she would hold on to those details like coordinates, proof that the good part had been real, that it had existed, that it had not been a story she told herself. But that was later. Right now her phone was ringing and it was Camille. She answered before the second ring because Camille had an instinct for calling at exactly the moment when Naomi most needed to hear a familiar voice. a talent that operated apparently without any conscious effort on Camille's part, and that Naomi had come to rely on more than she ever acknowledged out loud. "Okay," Camille said, skipping hello entirely. "I need you to open Instagram right now." "Morning to you too, Naomi. Instagram. Now." She put her on speaker and opened the app. Her following had gone from 412 people, mostly colleagues and a few college contacts she had never unfollowed out of inertia, to just under 200,000 in 18 days. She still hadn't fully processed that number. It sat in her mind like an object she kept walking around rather than picking up. "See it," Naomi said. "Scroll to the Explore page. Look at what's trending." She scrolled. The reunion clip had been viewed by now, somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 million times across platforms. It had generated opinion videos, reaction content, think pieces, a surprisingly moving essay in an online magazine about Black women and public validation that had made Naomi cry in a bathroom for the second time in 3 weeks, though under substantially different circumstances. It had generated fan accounts, actual fan accounts, dedicated to her and Junwoo as a couple, posting edits of their public appearances together with music underneath. It had also generated something else. She found it on the third scroll. A gossip blog with a significant following had published a piece that morning. The headline read, "Gold Digger or Genuine?" Beneath it, a series of photographs. Naomi recognized them immediately. They were from years ago, taken at a rooftop event she had attended while working 3 jobs to support herself through her early career. She was laughing in one of them, dressed well because she had always dressed well even when she couldn't entirely afford to, because presentation was one of the few things fully within her control. Standing next to a man she had met exactly once and never spoken to again. The caption beneath the photo had been written with the specific careful dishonesty of people who understand that implication is harder to sue over than accusation. Sources close to the billionaire's inner circle question whether the relationship is everything it appears. Sources close to the billionaire's inner circle. Naomi lowered the phone slowly. She said, "Who posted this? The blog account is anonymous," Camille said, and her voice had lost the urgency and replaced it with the careful steadiness of someone delivering information they wish they didn't have. "But someone fed them those photos. Those aren't public, Naomi. Someone went looking." Someone went looking. She thought about Vanessa at the reunion, the way she had watched Junwoo cross the room, the expression on her face that the internet had turned into a meme. Vanessa, who had Philip and the beautiful house and the social circle and the full and sufficient life, and who had apparently decided that none of it was enough if Naomi Bennett was somewhere in the world being happy. Why? That question again, the one that had followed her since college. Why this much effort? Why this much investment in her diminishment? What had she ever done except survive? She didn't have the answer yet. But across the world, in a sleek high-rise office in the Gangnam district of Seoul, a woman who was significantly more dangerous than Vanessa Whitmore was reading the same blog post with a different kind of interest. Seo Yurin had heard about Naomi Bennett the same way she heard about most things that threatened her interests. Through a network of contacts, so carefully maintained it functioned less like a social circle and more like an intelligence operation. She was 32 years old, impeccably educated, the daughter of one of Korea's most influential media families, and she had spent the better part of 3 years positioning herself as the inevitable future Mrs. Kang. Not through sentiment, through strategy, through the patient, methodical accumulation of proximity and alliance and shared business interest that she had always understood was a more reliable foundation than something as unstable as feeling. She had understood Junwoo. Or she had believed she understood him. His coldness, his precision, his allergy to anything that smelled like performance or manipulation. She had calibrated herself accordingly. She had been, she thought, exactly what he needed. And then an unknown Black American architect had given him coffee in the rain. Yurin set her phone down on her glass desk with the controlled precision of someone who did not throw things even when they wanted to. She looked out her office window at the Gangnam skyline and she thought, with the clear-eyed focus that had served her well in every competitive situation she had ever entered, about what she actually had at her disposal. She had media connections that could make or break a public figure's reputation in 72 hours. She had corporate relationships that intersected with the Kang family business in ways that gave her leverage Naomi couldn't even begin to map. She had, as of this morning, a very interesting message from an American woman named Vanessa Whitmore who had found her through a mutual contact and had written, in the careful diplomatic language of someone who wanted to propose something they couldn't quite bring themselves to say directly, "I think we might have something in common. Would you be open to a conversation?" Yurin read the message a second time. Then she typed back 2 words, "Call me." Call between Vanessa and Yurin lasted 47 minutes. Naomi would never know the details of that conversation. She would never know that two women on opposite sides of the world, who had never met and had nothing in common except the specific shared experience of watching Kang Junwoo choose someone else, had found each other with the efficient precision of people whose pain had curdled into purpose. She would never know about the careful exchange of information, the photographs Vanessa had sourced from people in Naomi's past, the media contacts Yurin controlled, the strategy they assembled together over 47 minutes like two architects designing something intended specifically to collapse. What Naomi knew was that on a Tuesday morning in Seoul, 3 weeks into the most unexpectedly wonderful chapter of her life, she opened her phone and the world had apparently decided to have a very loud opinion about who she was. The headlines had multiplied overnight. Kang Junwoo's American girlfriend, the truth behind the fairy tale, a lifestyle blog with 2 million followers. Is Seoul's most eligible billionaire being played? An entertainment channel with a verified tick, and a comments section that Naomi made the firm decision never to read again after the first 30 seconds. Sources reveal Naomi Bennett's calculated rise. This one had a byline, a real journalist's name attached to it, which made it somehow worse. The veneer of legitimacy stretched thin over a collection of implications and anonymous quotes that added up to a portrait of a woman Naomi did not recognize as herself. She sat at the kitchen island in Junwoo's penthouse with her coffee going cold in front of her and read all of it, every word. She had learned long ago that looking away from difficult things did not make them smaller. It only meant you were surprised by them in worse moments. Junwoo came in from his morning run to find her exactly like that, still, composed, phone in hand, the particular stillness of a person who has absorbed something and is deciding what to do with it. He read her face before he read the articles. He always did. Talk to me, he said, sitting across from her without preamble, still in his running clothes, giving her his full attention the way he always did, completely, without the distracted half-presence that most people offered when they had other things competing for their focus. She turned the phone around and showed him. He read. She watched him read. His expression didn't change dramatically, but she had learned the fine print of his composure by now, the slight tightening around the jaw, the particular quality of his silence when he was containing something significant. You're in, he said. It wasn't a question. Naomi looked at him carefully. You know her, he paused, choosing the word with his usual precision. Expected to be together, by our families, by certain business circles. She expected it also. He set the phone down. It didn't happen because I didn't want it to happen. She has never fully accepted that. The American angle, Naomi asked. The photos from years ago, someone in Atlanta sourced those. His jaw tightened fractionally. Vanessa, that's my guess. They looked at each other across the kitchen island with the shared understanding of two people who have just confirmed that what they're facing is not random hostility, but organized, deliberate, well-resourced hostility. Which was worse in some ways and clarifying in others. Random cruelty was exhausting because it had no logic. This had logic. This had architecture, which meant it could be understood, and things that could be understood could eventually be dismantled. Handle it, Junwoo said. Not asking you to handle it, Naomi said evenly. I'm asking you to be honest with me. Is there anything in my past, anything they might find that you should know about before they publish it? He looked at her steadily. Is there 3 jobs? A period of about 8 months when I was 24 where I was behind on rent and maxed out a credit card keeping my mother's electricity on after she got sick. She held his gaze. Nothing shameful, but nothing glamorous either. I survived, and survival leaves marks that people who never had to survive anything like to use as ammunition. Something moved across his face. Not pity, she would have stood up and left if it were pity. It was something else. Recognition, maybe. The expression of someone who understood from their own experience of a different kind, what it cost to hold yourself together when the circumstances of your life were doing their level best to pull you apart. They will try to make your survival look like calculation, he said quietly. I know, they will be wrong, I know that too. She picked up her coffee, found it cold, set it back down. Owing something and experiencing the world screaming the opposite at you are two different things, Junwoo. He was quiet for a moment. Then, does it make you want to leave? The question was direct, which she appreciated. No cushioning, no performance of certainty designed to preempt her answer. Just the honest question, asked by a man who understood that she was a person with agency and choices, and that one of those choices was walking away, and who was asking sincerely rather than rhetorically. She thought about it, actually thought about it, sitting with the question rather than deflecting it. No, she said finally. It makes me tired, it makes me angry. It makes me wish for about 10 minutes every morning that I was the kind of person who could be ordinary and unnoticed and left alone. She looked at him. but it doesn't make me want to leave. Something in him settled, visibly slightly, like a building that had been braced for impact and was now recalibrating. What neither of them knew was that the articles were only the opening move, because 3 days later, on a bright Thursday afternoon when Naomi was reviewing design sketches at the penthouse dining table and Junwoo was in back-to-back meetings, the elevator opened and a woman walked in who had not been announced by security, which meant security had been told by someone with the authority to instruct them to let her pass. Naomi looked up. The woman was in her early 60s. Beautifully dressed in the kind of understated way that communicated wealth so established, it had nothing left to prove. Her posture was immaculate. Her expression was the composed, unreadable expression of someone who had spent decades in rooms where the stakes were high, and had long since learned never to let their face be the thing that gave something away. She looked at Naomi with the specific, careful assessment of someone doing a calculation, and Naomi, who had spent her career reading spaces and understanding immediately what they were designed to make you feel, understood within approximately 4 seconds that this woman had not come here for a pleasant introduction. "You must be Naomi," the woman said. Her English was precise, lightly accented, clearly not her first language and clearly not a limitation. "I am," Naomi said. She stood, not out of deference, out of the instinct of a woman who had learned early that you do not receive certain conversations sitting down. "I am Kang Soon-yi," the woman said, Junwoo's mother. Room felt very quiet suddenly. "He didn't tell me you were coming," Naomi said. "He doesn't know." She looked around the penthouse briefly, not admiringly, just a survey, the way you look at a space you own and are checking the condition of, then back at Naomi. "I want to meet you without him present. I find that conversations are more honest that way." Naomi held her gaze. "I agree," she said. "Please sit down." If Soon-yi was surprised by the steadiness of that response, she didn't show it. She sat. Naomi sat across from her. The design sketches were still spread between them on the table like a reminder. "I was working. I have work. I have a life that existed before this room and will exist after it." Soon-yi looked at them briefly. "Architecture," she said. "Yes, Junwoo mentioned it." A pause. "He mentions you a great deal. I hope that's been a positive experience for you," Naomi said carefully. "It has been a surprising one." Soon-yi looked at her directly, and for just a moment the mask of perfect composure shifted fractionally, and what Naomi saw underneath, it was not cruelty exactly, but something harder and more complicated. The expression of a woman who loved her son with the fierce, territorial love of someone who had protected him through things Naomi didn't yet know about, and who had decided from that place of fierce protection that Naomi was a threat. "I'm going to be direct with you," Soon-yi said. "Please," Naomi said. "I prefer it." Soon-yi reached into the structured bag beside her and placed something on the table between the design sketches. A check. Naomi looked at it. She didn't pick it up. She looked at the number, which had enough zeros to represent several years of her firm's revenue, and then she looked back up at Soon-yi with an expression that she kept entirely neutral through a significant act of will. "I would like you to understand," Soon-yi said, "that I bear you no personal hostility. You seem like an intelligent woman, a capable one." She gestured toward the sketches almost imperceptibly. "This is not about who you are as a person. It is about what is practical, what is suitable, what is best for my son's future in ways that extend far beyond what either of you can currently see." Naomi said nothing. She was listening. "Fully, carefully, the way you listen when someone is telling you exactly who they are. Take this," Soon-yi said. "Return to America, build your firm, live your life well." A pause. "Leave my son." Room was silent. Outside, Seoul continued its relentless aliveness 42 floors below, indifferent to the specific gravity of what was happening in this room. Somewhere in the building, Junwoo was in a meeting, not knowing his mother was here, not knowing that the woman he had crossed an ocean to find was sitting across from his mother with a check on the table between them and the complete architecture of her future hanging in the air waiting for her answer. Naomi looked at the check for a long moment, then she reached out, and slowly, deliberately, with the steady hands of a woman who had made her decision before her fingers moved, she slid it back across the table. The check sat between them on the table like a question that had already been answered. Soon-yi looked at it, then at Naomi. Her expression hadn't changed. That immaculate, decades-practiced composure held firm, but something behind her eyes shifted. The subtle recalibration of a woman who had walked into this room with a strategy and was now, for perhaps the first time in a long time, uncertain about the next move. "Refusing," she said, not a question, a confirmation. "I'm refusing," Naomi said. "You understand what that check represents." "I understand exactly what it represents." Naomi kept her voice level, not cold, not heated, simply steady in the way of someone who has located the ground beneath them and planted both feet. "It represents the assumption that I'm here for what Junwoo has, that if the number is large enough, I'll confirm what you already believe about me." She paused. I won't do that. Not because I'm performing something for your benefit, but because it isn't true. Soon you was quiet. I met your son, Naomi continued, on a rainy night in Seoul when he was sitting alone outside a pharmacy looking like the world had just finished explaining something terrible to him. I didn't know his name. I didn't know what he owned or what he ran or how many floors this building had. I knew he was a person having an extraordinarily hard night, and I had paracetamol and an umbrella and a coffee I was willing to share. She looked at Sunyi directly. That's the beginning of this story, not a calculation, not a strategy. A rainy night and a person who needed someone to sit with him. Something moved across Sunyi's face, so brief that Naomi almost missed it. But it was there, a crack in the composed surface, small and quickly sealed, but real. My son, Sunyi said carefully, has been surrounded his entire life by people who wanted things from him, who performed warmth in exchange for access, who treated his trust as a resource to be extracted. A pause. He has been hurt by this, more than he would ever tell you. I know, Naomi said quietly. You know, Sunyi repeated, and the faint skepticism in her voice was less sharp than it had been moments ago. He told me about the betrayal, the family scandal. He didn't give me details, and I didn't ask for them because they weren't mine to ask for. But I know it happened, and I know what it cost him, and I know that the night I met him on those steps he was carrying all of it alone. She held the older woman's gaze. I'm not asking you to trust me today. I'm not asking you to welcome me or approve of me or pretend that any of this is easy for you. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that the thing you're trying to protect your son from, being loved by someone who wants nothing from him, is actually the thing he finally has. The room was very still. Sunyi looked at her for a long moment. The check remained untouched between them. Outside Seoul hummed its 42 floor below indifference, and the afternoon light moved across the table, and Naomi waited with the patience of a woman who had said everything she intended to say, and understood that the next move belonged to someone else. Sunyi stood. She picked up her bag. She looked at Naomi one final time with an expression that was no longer entirely the one she had arrived with, still guarded, still complicated, but fractured now in a way that suggested something had entered it that hadn't been there before. She left without the check. Naomi sat alone at the table for a long time after the elevator closed. Then she called Camille. She offered me money to leave, she said when Camille answered. The sound that came through the phone was not entirely a word. It was the specific vocalization of a best friend receiving information that has temporarily exceeded the processing capacity of language. I gave it back, Naomi added. Naomi. Camille's voice, when it returned to full function, was thick with something. I need you to know that I would have taken that check and bought a house and felt no shame whatsoever. Despite everything, Naomi laughed. It was short and genuine, and it released something that had been sitting in her chest since the elevator opened. I know you would have. You didn't because you're you, and honestly I've never been more proud of you in my entire life. A pause. Does Junwoo know? Not yet. Don't carry this alone. She did tell him. That evening when the meetings were finished and the city had transitioned from its daytime version to its nighttime one and they were sitting on the balcony with the Han River below them, she told him everything. The arrival, the check, the conversation, the refusal. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she had come to deeply value about him, the quality of his attention when she spoke, the way he received information without immediately filling the space around it with his own response. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, then he said, I'm sorry, you don't need to, I do. He looked at her with the direct, unguarded honesty that he reserved for moments when performance of any kind would be an insult to what was being said. She had no right to do that, and I am sorry that you were alone in that room when she did. Naomi looked at him. Your mother loves you, she said. She's wrong about me, but she loves you from a real place. He looked slightly stunned by that, as though he had braced for a different response, and the one he received had arrived from a direction he hadn't anticipated. Are you that generous, he said quietly, about someone who just tried to pay you to disappear? Because she reminded me of someone, Naomi said simply. Someone who was also trying badly and misguidedly to protect the person she loves. She met his eyes. I know what that looks like from the outside. I've been on the receiving end of it before. It doesn't make it right, but it makes it understandable. He reached across and took her hand. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to, but the world, which had been building towards something for weeks, was not finished yet. 2 days later, Yurin's campaign reached its peak. The manipulated photographs were picked up by 3 major entertainment outlets. Its gold digger narrative was trending on 2 platforms simultaneously. A prominent blogger with a media family connection, Yurin's Connection, specifically, published a long-form piece suggesting the entire reunion moment had been staged, that Naomi had orchestrated the viral clip. that the relationship was a publicity strategy designed to elevate an obscure American architect on the back of a Korean billionaire's name. The piece had 400,000 shares by noon, and Junwoo's PR team called to say that the board of directors was requesting a statement. That investors were watching, that certain partners were expressing concern about the distraction. That perhaps, given the circumstances, a temporary period of public distance between Junwoo and Naomi might be strategically advisable until the news cycle moved on. Junwoo listened to his PR team deliver this recommendation with the patient attention he gave everything. Then he told them he was calling a press conference. His PR team did not take this well. He called it anyway. For 48 hours, the speculation was volcanic. Every entertainment channel and gossip blog and business news outlet that had been covering the story redirected entirely to the question of what Kang Junwoo was about to say. Theories multiplied. Half the internet was convinced he was about to issue a careful statement creating distance. The other half, mostly the people who had watched the reunion video 9 million times and felt personally invested in the outcome, were hopping for something else entirely and trying not to want it too much because wanting things too much is how you get hurt. Yomi watched the coverage from the penthouse and tried to read nothing into any of it. On the morning of the press conference, Junwoo came to find her. She was at the dining table, working. The design sketches were back because her clients still existed and her firm still existed in her life. The one she had built from 3 jobs and a maxed credit card, and the fierce, stubborn refusal to let difficult circumstances define her ceiling, that life continued regardless of what the internet was doing. He stood in the doorway for a moment watching her work. "You don't have to come," he said. She looked up. "Try and stop me." The press conference room was full in a way that conference rooms are full when the story is genuinely unpredictable. Not the performed attention of journalists covering something routine, but the real, electric attention of a room that doesn't know what's about to happen and is genuinely waiting to find out. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters filled every seat. The murmur of speculation was constant until Junwoo walked in, and then it stopped completely the way all noise stopped when he entered spaces, that gravitational silence that followed him everywhere. Naomi walked in beside him. He went to the podium. She stood to his left, one step back, which was where she had placed herself because she was there as herself, not as an accessory, not as a prop in someone else's statement. He looked at the room. The room looked back, then he spoke. "I have been asked," he said in the measured, carrying voice of a man entirely comfortable with rooms full of people waiting for him to say something, "to create distance between myself and the woman I came to this country to find." He paused. The room was absolutely silent. "I want to be clear about my answer." He turned and looked at Naomi. She looked back at him and she was not performing composure. She was simply present, standing in a room full of cameras and history and everything they had survived together in the past several weeks, and she was exactly herself, which was the only thing she had ever been and the exact thing that had started all of this. "Woman beside me is not a scandal," he said, facing the cameras again. "She is not a strategy. She is not a story someone else gets to write." A pause. "She is the woman I love." Room erupted. And then in the specific stunned silence that followed the eruption as everyone processed what came next, he stepped away from the podium. He turned to face her fully. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and he took out a ring that caught the press conference lighting and threw it in every direction simultaneously. He looked at her, she looked at him. In the background, cameras were flashing. Someone was already live. The internet was already exploding with the speed of something that had been waiting to happen and had finally, irrevocably happened. Somewhere in Atlanta, Vanessa Whitmore would open her phone in approximately 4 minutes and see it, and the marriage that was already fracturing under the weight of her obsession would receive the final information it needed to understand that it was over. Yurin would see it from her Gangnam office and sit very still for a long time before beginning to understand the full cost of the campaign she had run. And Sunye, watching from somewhere private, would see her son's face, genuinely unguarded, genuinely present, genuinely happy in a way she had not seen in years, and would sit with that image long enough for something in her carefully constructed certainty to begin slowly to shift. But none of that had happened yet. Right now there was only this room, and this man on one knee, and this question hanging in the air between them. "Naomi Bennett," Junwoo said, quietly enough that it was almost private, almost just for her, almost as intimate as a rainy night outside a pharmacy in Seoul. "Will you marry me?" She thought about the girl who had stood alone at a reunion 3 weeks ago counting the minutes until she could disappear. She thought about the 18-year-old who had arrived at college on a scholarship and spent 4 years being quietly, persistently, invisibly told she was less than. She thought about 3 jobs and a max credit card and her mother's electricity bill, and every room she had ever stood in where someone had assessed her and found her insufficient. She thought about a rainy night and a stranger on pharmacy steps and the 40 minutes that had changed the direction of everything. She thought about what it meant to be fully seen, not despite everything, because of it. Yes, she said. The room erupted a second time louder, and this time it didn't stop. Outside, Soul was doing what Soul always did, living loudly, moving constantly, burning gold in every direction. The city that had witnessed the beginning of this story, the rainy night and the pharmacy steps and the coffee given freely to a stranger, was now witnessing something else entirely. Not an ending, a beginning. The woman they had mocked for being single. The woman they had tried to pay away, smear away, scare away. The woman who had slid a check back across a table and stood in a press conference room and refused, at every turn, to be anything other than completely and unapologetically herself. She was going to be a Kang. And the world, whether it was ready or not, was just going to have to find a way to be fine with that. If this story moved you the way it moved us writing it, hit subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Drop a comment below telling us whose reaction you wanted to see most. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story about a woman who refused to be diminished, share this with them.